This video is about food. It's also about a conspiracy between multinational corporations working together to prevent you understanding the truth. It's a video about lies, liars, bad science, questionable influences, and a banging recipe for gnocchi. And it starts with a true story.
In 2019, a collection of 37 researchers known as the EAT-Lancet Commission published Food in the Anthropocene, the EAT-Lancet Commission on Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems, in the highly respected medical journal The Lancet. The researchers spanned food science, medicine, climate change, ecology, and bioethics, coming from 16 different countries. And while they had their differences in opinion, their message in the paper was clear. The way we currently grow our food is unsustainable. As one expert put it,
if everyone in the world was able to eat like us in Europe, the world would collapse immediately. Which means if we're going to get the other people in the world to eat like us, our diets are going to have to change.
Agriculture, the report laid out, was among the largest drivers of climate change, biodiversity loss, freshwater use, and interference with the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. And as agriculture depends on functioning natural ecosystems, we were rapidly eroding our ability to feed ourselves. But different parts of the food system contributed differently. For example, red meat and dairy production hugely contributed to deforestation in the tropics and to global methane emissions, driving climate change. The paper proposed a reference diet, the planetary health diet, that would, based on extensive literature reviews, not only reduce our impact on the environment, but also reduce the burden on global healthcare systems, because the way that we eat is also pretty bad for us. This diet, which was not prescriptive, but a reference, was largely based on fruit, veg, and whole grains, containing some seafood and poultry, but basically no red meat, processed meat, or refined grains like white bread. The authors estimated that this reference diet could provide food for 10 billion people by 2050 and keep the Earth within a safe operating space, but cautioned that even small increases in the consumption of red meat and dairy in particular would make this impossible. Livestock produces an estimated 12 to 20% of global carbon emissions, and global meat production grew by 48% between 2003 and 2023, with the majority consumed in the United States, accounting for 21% of the world's beef, Europe and other countries with large industrial livestock industries. In practical terms, as reported by DSMOG,
we must rapidly reduce meat consumption if the world is going to avoid ever more catastrophic climate change and environmental decline.
However, in the run-up to the release of the report, a massive coordinated counter-movement started spinning up. In particular, a campaign spearheaded by online influencers became popular a week before the report launched and continued to be popular in the weeks after, surpassing the total number of tweets mentioning the EAT-Lancet report. This #YesToMeat campaign and its supporters went on to persistently target and harass several of the EAT-Lancet authors with conspiracy theories, personal attacks, and we've heard there were possibly death threats. We tried to verify that last one by speaking to multiple researchers, but I think understandably, none of them replied to us. At any rate, multiple authors reported sustaining damage to their careers and their mental health from the constant online attacks. And this backlash was so effective that the Italian government successfully pressured the World Health Organization to cancel its sponsorship of an event to promote the report. So even though the paper went on to be largely supported by the scientific community and many governments, by April 2024 it had become one of the top 10 non-economics papers most cited in government policy documents, the public narrative was shaped by misinformation and harassment towards scientists. But the simple fact is, these researchers received targeted, intense harassment because of their research on how our Western diets have negative health and environmental impacts. Something that should not be controversial. And the reason for this harassment involves a conspiracy at the highest level, a PR firm and a bunch of cows. But first, we need to talk about tobacco. In the 1950s, American scientists showed that cigarette smoking caused cancer. Reader's Digest ran an article on their work called Cancer by the Carton, and understandably, the tobacco industry was thrown into a panic.
The public now knew that their products actively endangered their lives. Something had to be done. And while the moral thing to do was stop selling the lethal product, the heads of the 4 biggest tobacco companies in America took a different approach. In 1953, they hired a public relations firm called Hill & Knowlton.
And the strategy Hill and Knowlton would take was the following. Firstly, convince the public that there was no sound evidence that smoking caused cancer. Secondly, that recent media reports were just sensationalist accusations made by publicity-seeking scientists trying to get more funding. And then to create industry-approved information, an industry committee for public information to provide an entirely pro-cigarette message to counter the anti-cigarette scientific one. But John Hill, the head of the PR firm, argued that they should also sponsor extra research that would come to conclusions that the industry wanted and they could point to in their pro-cigarette campaign. Hill said that, quote, "Scientific doubt must remain in the minds of the public."
And for half a century, the tobacco industry did all of this. They attacked scientists, cherry-picked data to match their talking points, sent educational resources to thousands of doctors and schools, exploited the media's interest in letting both sides say their piece on an issue. They recruited respected scientists, respected in other fields, to parrot their talking points. Men like Fred Seitz, former president of the National Academy of Sciences, who worked on the Manhattan Project and knew nothing about cancer. In 1969, an anonymous tobacco executive wrote a memo that outlined their whole approach.
Doubt is our product, since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the mind of the general public.
The power of the tobacco industry was greatly diminished when the public was left in very little doubt that smoking causes cancer. The facts eventually won out, in court and in the minds of the public. But the big tobacco playbook of manufacturing doubt in the mind of the public through attacking the evidence, attacking the scientists, and commissioning their own research lived on. If you've seen my other videos before, you've probably seen me talk about how the fossil fuel industry replicated that playbook in response to the increasingly clear evidence that their products were warming the planet.
In fact, as well as borrowing the playbook, they borrowed some of the same scientists, such as Fred Seitz. Check out our video on the decade we lost Earth to see how he fit into the story of killing the first climate conference in the 1980s.
But it's not just big oil that have learned from big tobacco. The same techniques were used by industries around acid rain, the hole in the ozone layer, and all over the place by the pharmaceutical industry. And by big tobacco themselves.
Who did not die? Oh, isn't that swell?
But started operating under a different guise.
You see, in the 1960s, R.J. Reynolds, one of the largest tobacco companies in the US, wanted to diversify its business. So it acquired the Hawaiian Punch brand of drinks. And in the following decades, R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris, another tobacco company, started aggressively acquiring brands in the food and drink space, such as Del Monte, Nabisco, General Foods, Kraft, and 7-Up. If you know these brands, you'll know that they produce what we now term ultra-processed foods.
Now, I've never been a smoker, but I know cigarettes are really addictive. And I just assumed that that was a natural property of cigarettes, which is kind of true. But tobacco companies learned that if you added stuff to cigarettes, you could make them a lot more addictive. You could add more nicotine, you could add ammonia to make the nicotine easier for your body to absorb, though it's unclear if that one actually works. You can add sugar, you can add flavorings. Up to 4% of the weight of a cigarette is added sugar. And the industry took all the research they had done on making their products as addictive as possible and applied it to their newly acquired brands of food.
Ultra-processed food, drawing on that research, is chemically engineered to be hyper-palatable, having the right proportions of fat, salt, and sugar in them to activate the brain's reward mechanisms and stimulate overeating. Independent research found that when a food brand was ultimately owned by big tobacco, it is 80% more likely to be hyper-processed with salt and sugar.
And just before I recorded this video, a new groundbreaking report from researchers at Harvard, the University of Michigan, and Duke University has revealed how deeply embedded the big tobacco playbook is in the food industry. The report, which was published on February 3rd, reviews findings from addiction science, nutrition, and public health history, and concludes that
cigarettes and UPFs, ultra-processed foods, are not simply natural products, but highly engineered delivery systems designed specifically to maximize as biological and psychological reinforcement and habitual overuse.
Through things like
Dose optimization, delivery speed, hedonic engineering, environmental ubiquity, and deceptive formulation.
This included things like marketing ultra-processed foods with misleading labels as low-fat or sugar-free to make them seem healthier, just like the cigarette filters in the 1950s that falsely claimed to make cigarettes healthier. It's even something that normal people are beginning to recognize. One of the report's authors said her patients would say, I feel addicted to this stuff, I crave it. I used to smoke cigarettes and now I have the same habit, but it's with donuts and soda. I know it's killing me. I want to quit, but I can't. And the report goes on to conclude that, quote, many ultra-processed foods share more characteristics with cigarettes than with minimally processed fruits or vegetables. And perhaps obviously, these foods are bad for you. They have been directly linked to chronic diseases like obesity and diabetes. And they are not a small fraction of the food industry.
Starting from the mid-1980s, when the tobacco industry started acquiring, developing, and marketing these products, ultra-processed foods became a larger and larger fraction of Americans' diets. Today, about 60% of the average American's calories come from ultra-processed foods. And though tobaccos have since spun off their food businesses, their legacy remains.
The landscape of how food is sold and marketed, especially in America, isn't just inspired by big tobacco. It was created by big tobacco. Big food has inherited the science of addiction and the playbook of misinformation to sell you products that aren't just bad for you, they're bad for the planet. And yes, by the way, big food is definitely accurate. There's this idea in economics called the four-firm concentration ratio, which is the percentage share of a given market that is controlled by the largest 4 companies. In an even playing field, this percentage is really low. An oligopoly, where a few people effectively control the market, is said to have formed where the four-firm concentration ratio is above 40%. Something that is bad, by the way, because it means a few people can set the price for a product and the manner in which it is made, and they can set both at a level that is great for them and bad for everyone else. In the United States specifically, a 2021 paper found that just 4 companies control over half the market for rice, over 60% of the market for fresh bread, and almost 80% of the market for pasta. It's even more consolidated in the meat industry, as 4 companies control 85% of America's cattle, and just 2 companies control the breeding stock for 94% of the world's egg-laying hens and 99% of its turkeys.
In fact, while we were writing this video, 2 class action lawsuits against oligopolies were filed and settled against pork and beef producers in America.
The world's food supply, and America's food supply in particular, has a market landscape similar to that of big tech. And in some cases, for specific foods, companies are as dominant as, or more dominant than, Amazon is in online retail. So when a new report comes out that says the way that we currently consume and produce our food has serious health and environmental impacts, the industry brought out the playbook they inherited and coordinated. Attacking the evidence presented, they argued that it was anti-livestock and neglected local differences. I'd just like to remind you of the point I made at the beginning of this video that it's us Westerners who are the weird ones with our huge consumption of meat and dairy in our diets. We are the local differences, and we are the problem. Related to this was the deployment or amplification of industry-approved information, such as from the European Food Agency, who protested that the recent report would, quote, result in an anti-livestock narrative, which sounds very official. Except the European Food Agency is not an actual agency. It's a random website based in Italy that has a name suspiciously similar to the European Food Safety Authority, which is the actual agency in the European Union regarding food. They ran a piece by a scientist from the scientific board of the World Farmers Organization, and that got a lot of attention, partly because of their name. But in this particular case, the most shocking part of the response came down to attacking the scientists themselves.
A general talking point was that this report was a top-down attempt by a small, unrepresentative, dogmatic global elite to mold public agricultural policy. And further, that one of the foundations that fund EAT was run by hypocrites with globe-trotting lifestyles.
But more specifically, the Animal Agriculture Alliance, a not-for-profit funded by various agricultural producers in the US, including 2 of the world's 5 largest meat companies, hired a PR firm called Red Flag. We know this because a document from Red Flag to the Animal Agriculture Alliance was leaked, stating,
"In the 2 weeks following publication of the EAT-Lancet report, this campaign's messages have continued to demonstrate remarkable success. Key stories have returned time and again in traditional and social media to reach major online influencers, particularly highlighting the radical nature of the EAT-Lancet diet and hypocrisy criticisms leveled at the EAT founders."
The document goes on to say that nearly half of the 1,300 articles about the EAT-Lancet report included Red Flag's campaign messages and quotes, and in particular, the 103 articles mentioning alleged hypocrisy of the group's funders sparked a Twitter conversation that received over 1 million more views than the top tweets posted by EAT about their report.
Targeted briefings and stakeholder activation ensured that some framed the EAT-Lancet report, plus another subsequent report, as radical and out of touch.
Now, this is all we have to go on. We don't know exactly what Red Flag did or did not do, but we can certainly say that just as with Big Tobacco hiring Hill & Knowlton back in 1953, the industry was directly trying to control the narrative around science that was damaging to their business model via a campaign. But unlike Big Tobacco in the 1950s, a key vector of this campaign was online, and specifically through online influencers. Ugh, these guys. We know that as part of their campaign, Red Flag briefed journalists and think tanks, but also online influencers to frame the EAT-Lancet report negatively. And those influencers stoked a culture war over diet, and especially meat and dairy, online.
Remember the hashtag #YesToMeat campaign that we started this video with? A paper in the Lancet found that a community in opposition to the EAT-Lancet report was rapidly organized on Twitter, primarily consisting of real people whipped into a frenzy based on the communication lines from Red Flag. What direct role the agency had in the hashtag is unclear. We don't know if they promoted it, for example, but they certainly worked with influencers to get their talking points out on Twitter.
And when you look at the influencers doing this, it's pretty obvious what was going on. An investigation by Rooted Research Collective found that just 53 social media influencers were responsible for reaching over 24 million people with nutrition-related disinformation, promoting diets like keto and carnivore, and generally undermining evidence-based nutritional science. And 96% of these super spreaders had clear financial incentives connected to their messaging. And look, this is how influencing works. Influencers make a living by being good at telling stories, normally about themselves, and monetizing that. And in the modern influencer economy, a key form of monetization is having your own products. It just makes sense if you have a large audience interested in a topic that you can offer them a product related to that topic. But I don't know about you, I think that it is wrong if in order to sell your products, you have to lie and spread information that you may or may not know is false, especially given the fact that you selling your products based on lies doesn't happen in isolation. Those lies have consequences.
A great piece of work was done by the Changing Markets Foundation, who reviewed over 285 million digital posts relating to meat and dairy, and found that almost 80% of the posts containing misinformation directly attacked the science, scientists, and alternatives to meat. And the single largest category of misinformation was around the elite trying to push people onto different diets as part of the Great Reset, with associated conspiracy theories.
Many people engaged with the response to EAT-Lancet were led to believe that a group of others were threatening them and forcing them to change the way they ate. Just to remind you, that wasn't the case. The report suggested the planetary health diet that we could feed everyone healthily with, but it was a suggestion, a reference. And the online discourse did not reflect this. Posts from key influencers repeating misinformation from the agricultural lobby whipped users into a frenzy, making them think that they were under attack and needed to fight back.
Reporting from DSmog, who broke the story, quoted a professor involved in the report as saying of the backlash, "Everyone was shocked by the volume and tone of the tweets, the aggressiveness and the degree of lying, to put it very bluntly."
This playbook is very similar to what academics call stochastic terrorism. In stochastic terrorism, people in positions of power specifically target and demonize individuals or a group with the express purpose of inspiring other as yet unknown actors to attack and in some cases commit terroristic violence against those individuals or that group. Thankfully, in this case, it doesn't seem like any real-world violence resulted from this campaign. However, it has been well documented that online hate can often radicalize individuals to commit real-life violence. There are real consequences to spreading hate online and demonizing people, whether it results in emotional and psychological distress, hurts careers and opportunities for innocent people, or it inspires violence. And I should say for legal reasons that I am not accusing the agricultural industry, Red Flag, or the influencers they worked with of terrorism. The term stochastic terrorism is usually used to describe politicians like Donald Trump, who specifically try to indirectly inspire violence by demonizing political opponents. However, they are responsible for creating a toxic online environment, specifically targeting and demonizing scientists and funders, which resulted in a great deal of hatred and threats of violence being made. All because they didn't want people to start considering their diets. And while many of the influencers involved sit at the intersection between multiple conspiracy theories, some are medical professionals. I mean, here in the UK, a campaign funded by the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, Quality Meat Scotland, and Hubby Cig Cymru sought to bring a more balanced perspective to public discussion around the health properties of red meat, and work with what they called well-respected media medics, including Dr. Alex off Love Island, nutritionist Dr. Teare 2, and Dr. Josh Walrick to push meat industry propaganda. In my opinion, and the opinion of many doctors at the time, a pretty shameful abuse of audience trust for the sake of making some money. These doctors should have known better, in several ways.
Though Dr. Alex certainly hasn't learned from the experience, he's now hawking Toby Carvery roast dinners. For my international audience, this is a bit like if Anthony Fauci started endorsing Cracker Barrel. But also, Fauci first got famous on The Bachelor. It's weird.
Look, there's a whole rabbit hole we could go down here in how science-based influencing works, but this video is long enough as it is. We haven't actually even finished how the food industry used the big tobacco playbook. Specifically, this last part, the industry funding its own research to back up its talking points. And the reason that I've left this until last is because I haven't seen any evidence that the industry funded studies explicitly in response to the Lancet report, but there is plenty of evidence that the industry has been doing this for a long time.
50 years ago, the sugar industry sponsored research which discovered that sugar consumption did not increase the risk of heart disease and failed to disclose that funding in their final paper, whose conclusions were later firmly refuted. More recently, in 2015, the New York Times uncovered emails between Coca-Cola and researchers who were conducting studies aimed at downplaying the role of sugary drinks on obesity, and the National Confectioners Association funded studies that managed to show that children that ate candy weighed less, because those children that ate candy in the study also exercised more. These studies served as the basis for what we now call the war on fat, which saw the food industry, especially ultra-processed food producers, reduce fat in their products while increasing sugar in their products. Legitimate scientists usually aren't to blame for the constant seesaw you see in the news cycle. Fat is bad. No, actually, fat is good. Carbs are bad. No, actually, we should eat carbs. Repeat for every food type or macronutrient. This is all due to the food industry funding studies that are then spread by news outlets who often don't have the scientific expertise to spot bad research methods, fraudulent scientific journals, or discover conflicts of interests. It's gotten so ridiculous that back in 2015, a science journalist named John Bohannon purposely conducted a real but badly designed study that showed that eating chocolate helps you lose weight, and watched as mainstream media outlets ran the story uncritically. Meanwhile, when research was conducted by the meat industry, their conclusions were 4 times more likely to be favourable or neutral about red meat consumption than independently funded studies.
In short, Big Food has been doing all of this for decades, and specifically in response to the EAT-Lancet report being released, attacking the science, funding their own research, and pushing their own version of the facts. Just as Big Tobacco did, just as Big Oil did. It's literally the same. And just as with those other industries, this was done to mislead the public and prevent government policy being passed which would hurt the bottom line of these companies. But just like those other industries, this was sometimes done more overtly in the form of political lobbying. Just recently at COP30, negotiators were practically surrounded by lobbyists from companies like Nestle, JBS, Bayer, and PepsiCo, who were all there to greenwash their activities, downplaying their impact, and specifically to try and get governments to adopt a new way of measuring methane emissions that would get agriculture off the hook. Check out this reporting from DSMOG for more about that. This should be a far bigger news story than it is. And just as with big oil, this lobbying is working, and in certain governments, disinformation created by the industry is just being adopted as government policy. Where could I be referring to? America, of course!
Noted conspiracy theorist RFK Jr. has, since last year, been serving as the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services. In that time, he has promoted conspiracy theories including chemtrails, a link between vaccines and autism, and various claims about COVID-19. But proving that a stop clock is still right twice per day, he has also waged a crusade against ultra-processed foods and in favour of whole foods.
Except RFK Jr. has proposed an updated food pyramid. Now, the old food pyramid that you've probably heard of actually hasn't been a recommendation since 2011. It's kind of a 90s thing. Since 2011, it's been My Plate, which was a pretty sensible set of recommendations for Americans. So this new pyramid is an update ignoring the past 34 years of dietary recommendations. But it does actually have some pretty sensible suggestions, like you should be eating fruit and veg and whole grains and less sugar. But the rest of this pyramid borders on nonsensical. A, it doesn't say how much of each food type to eat. B, it's full of contradictions with advice like limit your saturated fat intake, but also consider cooking with butter and beef tallow. And C, it hugely prioritizes protein and specifically animal proteins. We'll come back to the topic of protein in a little bit, but this focus on animal protein and minimization of alternative sources is because several members of the committee that informed the dietary guidelines have close ties to the meat and dairy industry, something that they made no attempt to hide in a report. And this is after RFK Jr. said he wanted to overhaul the system by getting rid of people with conflicts of interest. Again, it's exactly the same thing as with big oil and their energy policy. This government is just being puppeteered by huge companies and parroting their misinformation. But talking about food is different to talking about tobacco or oil. We all consume food daily. We have a direct personal connection with the object of all of this misinformation and lobbying. And one of the objectives of the food industry is that you, personally, feel confused about what to believe about food.
You see one set of facts about nutrition or the environmental impact of a given food on social media, and then another conflicting set of facts from scientists, and then yet another set of facts from the government, and opinion piece after opinion piece after opinion piece in the press.
And this is what the food industry wants. If you're not sure about what the facts are, what the environmental impact of your diet is, then you don't know if you should be taking action to change your diet, or let alone what that change might look like. And I think this misinformation has been so effective and the campaigns around it so unchallenged, in a way that misinformation campaigns around tobacco and oil have been challenged, is because food is so deeply ingrained in our culture.
When you think of home, whether your specific family home or your hometown or home country, one of the things you think of is food. Meals that your mother made. For me, that means sausage casserole and apple and blackberry crumble. National institutions like a Sunday roast or fish and chips, or local specialties like Cornish pasties or stargazy pie. Yes, that is unfortunately a real thing.
Food is one of the things that we use to define ourselves. I mean, it's a way that we express ourselves 3 times a day. There's a tremendous amount of, for lack of a better term, baggage when it comes to food. Like whether you're talking about the environmental impacts or the social impacts or the health impacts of the way that we produce and consume food, that is being rudely added on to a lifelong conversation that you have been having with your food. And nowhere is that more apparent than when talking about the heart of the EAT-Lancet report. Meat. You probably had a visceral reaction to me even mentioning the word. As soon as you mention meat, these cultural barriers get drawn up, these battle lines with people describing those on the other side as soy boy liberal cucks or carnivore cavemen. There's undoubtedly a cultural, even moral divide on this subject, but on top of that, the meat industry has created artificial confusion around the nutritional, dietary necessity of meat, especially with regards to protein. And to explain a bit more about that, here's my friend Dr. Rohin Francis.
It seems impossible these days to walk down a supermarket aisle without being assaulted by protein. Protein drinks, protein bars, protein pasta, protein popcorn. The human race will clearly never unlock its full potential until we put protein in our drinking water. Now, even if you buy regular versions of food like an unoptimized loser, you'll walk out of that supermarket with the feeling that we all need to be eating more protein. And this message is not accidental. There's been a huge protein propaganda push. Okay, you say, we've been told to eat more fiber and eat less sugar and so on for years. Isn't it fair that protein gets its time in the spotlight? Except the key difference is that people in countries like the US, here in the UK, Canada, Europe and so on don't eat enough fiber and they do eat too much sugar. But those same people already do eat enough protein. Protein deficiency is not something the vast majority of us have to worry about, particularly under the age of about 65, with 85% of Americans currently consuming over the recommended daily amount of 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. Remember, we can't store amino acids, the constituents of proteins, for use later. If you consume more than you need, you won't derive any additional benefit, and there may be some harm. And yet, the new US food pyramid from the Trump administration, or hugely influential podcasters like Andrew Huberman or Peter Teare, among many others, insist that we should be eating more. And those latter two, for example, they're investors in an ultra-processed protein bar, which they regularly promote. Now, Simon's already talked about big food's influence, but one change that seems to have turbocharged things in recent years, at least in my opinion, is that food companies have seen awareness spread among the public that ultra-processed foods are associated with poor health outcomes, which they are. So by enriching them with protein, suddenly those exact same ultra-processed foods can be rebranded as good for you, the health halo. There are conflicting health stories in the media on a daily basis on lots of different topics, so there's this widespread perception that scientists are in the dark about most aspects of dietary science, when in fact we have very good evidence for the main simple messages, like how important fruit and vegetable is. And it is true, of course, that nutrition science is very complex, and it is unlike other areas of medical research where we can organise blinded, randomised controlled trials. But that doesn't mean that we are hopelessly confused about how much protein to eat. And that illusion of confusion is deliberate. Putting the idea in people's minds that they aren't consuming enough protein creates uncertainty, and indeed distracts from much more important dietary and lifestyle factors which will move the needle much more than necking a dozen egg whites. Most people bombarded with pro-protein propaganda simply don't have the time nor the inclination to go trawling through evidence themselves. But when the nerds do, we spot telltale signs that this so-called confusion is concocted. Now, much of the research cited by food companies, but also by the bro-science influencers and other useful idiots online, is funded by the very companies that sell the product being tested, as you've already heard. Now, I'm not saying that they're fabricating results, but there are myriad ways that you can lie with research, from designing a study to stack the deck in favor of the outcome you want, to only publishing positive results and burying negative ones. Study design is one of the most overlooked aspects when it comes to interpreting medical research. The evidence to support high protein intake for weight training has been drastically overblown and is based on truly some of the worst quality studies I've seen. In fact, I didn't realize quite how non-existent the evidence is to support the idea that increasing protein offers a broadly linear increase in muscle mass. The most cited meta-analysis in this area is always presented as a segmental regression, in spite of the fact that it is statistically insignificant. This line that's often referred to by a lot of people in this field, suggesting that 1.6 grams per kilogram per day of protein should be the target has no statistical basis. It's literally just been drawn on with vibes. The conflation of protein with meat is also not accidental. You'd be forgiven for thinking that dedicated protein products or lean steaks are the only protein sources worth considering, but plant sources like beans, chickpeas, lentils, seeds, and so on far less frequently enter the conversation because they don't have such a powerful group of lobbyists behind them. A study published last year that examined 44 dietary studies looking at unprocessed red meat showed that 66% had links to the red meat industry. And even more importantly, those with industry funding underestimated the negative cardiovascular effects of red meat, whereas those without industry links generally found an unfavourable effect from higher red meat consumption. Meat and dairy have also been disproportionately focused on due to the non-evidence-based protein targets. It is both easy and healthy to derive your protein needs from a plant-based diet, even as an active young person. But if you are attempting to eat 2 or 3 times the recommended daily amount of protein, because that's what your favorite fitness podcaster has told you is required, you might turn to animal sources. There's no doubt they offer high protein, but this does not come without downsides. Some are obvious, like increasing your saturated fat intake, but others are less well understood. In long-term studies, we've seen higher rates of cardiovascular disease in people who have derived most of their protein from animal sources, especially if they've got any background of kidney disease. And in animal models, higher protein diets have been associated with shorter life expectancy, possibly through direct pro-inflammatory effects of something called leucine, which is an essential amino acid that is not only found in high quantities in meat, but it's so feted by bodybuilders that it has become a popular supplement in itself, even though it may accelerate atherosclerosis, which is the furring up inside your arteries, and possibly even cancer growth. Remember, algorithms reward repetition, simplicity or certainty, fear, and repetition. The benefits of high protein intake have been repeated so frequently that most people don't even stop to question it. But in reality, it's really not something you need to be worrying about.
There's no way to disentangle food from its cultural heritage. It is impossible to be entirely objective when it comes to food, or science in general, but that's a conversation for another time. The best that we can do is look at what the best quality, independent science says about food, the impact that growing it has on the planet, and the impact that consuming it has on our bodies. And that was the EAT-Lancet report released in 2019. But now, there's a new one.
Last year, EAT-Lancet 2.0 was released, and it was basically a revision of the last report with some important updates to real-world practicality, where they recognise that social systems and policies around food also need to transform to become more equitable and just to enact necessary changes. The main message of the problem we face and the solutions for it remained the same, however. Quote,
although current food systems have largely kept pace with population growth, ensuring sufficient caloric intake for many, they are the single most influential driver of planetary boundary transgression. More than half of the world's population struggles to access healthy diets, leading to devastating consequences for public health, social equity, and the environment.
Planetary boundary refers to 9 key ways in which our society interacts with the natural world, and currently we have breached boundaries in 7 of those areas, meaning that in 7 different areas our actions are unsustainable and actively diminishing the environment those actions depend on. This graph from the new report shows where the different planetary boundaries sit, and this is the effect our food systems have in that. For example, they estimate that approximately 30% of greenhouse gas emissions driving climate change come from food. A lot of that, methane from cattle. The crossed boundaries of land system change, biosphere integrity, freshwater change, biogeochemical flows, and climate change have all been significantly impacted by what we eat. But of course, not all types of food have uniform impacts on the environment. This updated report is extremely clear that meat, specifically red meat, and dairy products have an outsized impact. And the literature shows quite clearly that this is inherent to the foodstuff. You can reduce the impact of beef, for example, by eating local beef, reducing the transport emissions. But the vast majority of the environmental impacts don't come from the transport of the food. They come from the fact that it is beef, and it can only be grown in a certain way. And the proportion of meat and dairy in the diets of the richest 30% of the global population means we contribute to more than 70% of the environmental pressures from food systems that threaten further planetary boundary transgressions. The one I particularly draw your attention to is biosphere integrity. Agriculture is the single largest threat to the continued functioning of ecosystems on Earth, especially through deforestation. And considering that over half the world's GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature, and agriculture uniquely benefits from nature services, that means that the way we feed ourselves is rapidly undermining the bedrock of a functioning society, and especially our ability to feed ourselves. And as we've recently heard here in the UK, agriculture, specifically animal agriculture, threatens every key ecosystem with collapse within decades, leading to enormous knock-on effects on national security, and 1,000 other things. This is not an abstract threat at some point in the future. The Western diet is currently directly pushing the world towards a very dangerous place, and we don't have long to fix that.
But the report was also very clear that, quote,
"In this moment of increasing instability, food systems still offer an unprecedented opportunity to build the resilience of environmental, health, economic, and social systems, and are uniquely placed to enhance human well-being while also contributing to Earth system stability."
Food systems are at the core of making this century more sustainable, both for human well-being and for the systems we depend on. And we know how we need to change our food systems.
To keep our food systems sustainable, they estimated meat production would have to be reduced by 33%, while the production of fruits, vegetables, and nuts would need to increase by 63%, both relative to 2020. And that might sound like it would need more land and so cause more deforestation, more ecosystem loss. But actually, such a food system would take up less space.
We know that right now, the grazing lands and the cropland used to grow animal feed combine to make up 80% of all our agricultural land use. Yet, it still makes up for a minority of global calories and protein. The report makes it clear that meat and dairy are just wildly inefficient ways of making food that also have the effect of placing large pressures on healthcare systems. The report is unequivocal, as was the previous report. We will continue to breach our planetary boundaries and reap dangerous consequences until we transform our food systems. In the West, that means a move away from meat, and red meat and processed meat in particular, and dairy products. To limit the damage, we need to undertake this transformation as rapidly as possible.
And that starts with you. With the information from this video, you might want to do something. You need food in order to live, so just not participating in this system isn't an option. What you can do is change the way that you interact with it and try to change the system itself. On that latter point, there are many charities doing great work in the food space that you could support. In America specifically, Feeding America runs a network of food banks aiming to prevent food waste and improve food security. But if you would like to support an organization trying to make agriculture more sustainable by investigating supply chains, tracking deforestation, and lobbying both producers and retailers, please consider supporting Mighty Earth. I'll leave a link to them down below. They're doing really important work. But of course, you can also make big changes with what food you choose to consume. In fact, this might be the area where you have the most agency to limit your environmental impact. I think a lot of people though make the mistake of reading something like the EAT-Lancet report, maybe watching something like this video, and saying, that's it, I've got to be vegan, and then try it for a bit, find it maybe quite hard, and then fall off the wagon, develop senses of resentment or of guilt around that, and then become less likely to affect change in the future. Big changes take time to adapt to. It took me 8 years to go from being vegetarian to being vegan, and I'm not a perfect vegan. I'm probably vegan 90% of the time, 10% of the time I'm just vegetarian. But it's not a purity test. You don't have to be perfect in order to massively reduce your environmental impact. So instead of thinking that you have to go cold tofurkey, right away, try this instead. Cut out beef from your diet. It's the single biggest impact that you can make. And then maybe try being vegan 1 day a week and see how that goes. If you like, here's a recipe to get you started.
thinly slice 2 leeks and gently fry them in olive oil, or dairy-free butter for a really nice flavour, plus a bit of salt for 5 minutes. Chuck in a bit of chopped garlic for another minute. Then add a bit more oil or spread, make sure it's palm oil free spread by the way, and add about 500 grams of gnocchi. Cook for about another 5 minutes, stirring every now and again, and then add a drained tin of chickpeas and a couple of handfuls of spinach. After 2 minutes, stir in about half a jar of pesto and the juice from half a lemon. Season to taste, and then plate up. If you're feeling fancy, scatter over some zest from that half lemon.
This is delicious, and creating it took a fraction of the environmental impact of a dish containing meat or dairy. You do not have to compromise on flavour at all when it comes to being vegan. And if you like the look of that recipe, it's not from this book, but this is the #1 recommendation I have for everyone, the Happy Pear Vegan Cookbook. I just really like the way that it's laid out, really diverse recipes, very easy to follow. We use the gumbo from this all the time, their Indonesian satay curry. Not sponsored, I should point out, I just really like this. I'll leave a link to it in the description. And by doing so, not only are you doing your body a favor, you are taking the most impactful action you can in your day-to-day life to prevent the degradation of key ecosystems, prevent deforestation, and prevent species from going extinct. Of course, if you work in a business with lots of other people, or go to school or university, you can multiply this effect by helping others to do the same.
Because this is what the independent science tells us. Science that is not funded by the behemoths of big food, science that has not been deliberately misinterpreted and taken out of context by influencers and PR agencies, science as relayed by the scientists themselves.
We started this video with the story of such scientists and how they have been the target of a coordinated mis- and disinformation campaign run by big food, really big tobacco in a trench coat. I hope that this video has made it clear that the companies that feed us are not our friends. They are corporate giants who lie and cheat with the same playbook as some of the most reviled industries in history. And that much of the discourse around our food is shaped by those companies trying to protect their bottom line. This is yet another example of profit being pursued at the expense of everything else, notably our health and the health of the planetary life support systems that we depend on.
We know that this is happening, and we know how we can reform our food systems to do better by everyone. And now you know how you can contribute to that reform.
3 times a day, you have an opportunity to shape the future. Your plate is your direct connection to ecosystems across the world. No one can save the world on their own. I think a lot of us feel like we have no power over what the future looks like and stopping it from getting worse at all. But that's not true. And it's especially not true when it comes to food. Every day you participate in a system that currently threatens our survival. And you don't have to be a saint to affect change in that system. You can start small, imperfectly. I'm still imperfect, of course I am. But change will only come from people like me, like you. It will only come when people see through the tobacco industry playbook reheated by big food. It will only come from a mindset shift when you next order from a menu or look in the fridge.
A common expression is that you shouldn't bite the hand that feeds you. Michael Pollan wrote in his book In Defense of Food that instead you should shake the hand that feeds you. Extend gratitude to the people, the places, and the planet that make life possible. I'm deeply grateful to both the farmers and the earth that feeds me. That's why I changed my diet, why I, imperfectly, no longer eat animal products, because I want both farmers and planet to be around for a long time.
This video took several months to research and write and involved speaking to many experts. Me and my researcher Ian, rewrote the whole thing like twice. Obviously, that's a lot more time investment than a typical video, and we were only able to take our time and make sure that we were bringing you the most up-to-date research and the most relevant information without rushing to meet a sponsor deadline because of the support of my patrons. I'm extremely grateful to my community of patrons at patreon.com/SimonOxFizz, who form my largest and most important revenue stream. Without that community, I simply wouldn't be able to make the videos that I make. So in exchange for their support, starting at £3 a month, I provide early access to videos, exclusive content every month, and at producer tier and higher, the ability to vote on topics for me to cover.
Thank you to all my patrons, with a special thank you to Neil Carande, Alejandro Wilcox, and Rapsack.
If you'd like to join them and help me make more deep dive videos like this one, please head to patreon.com/SimonOxPhys, which will be linked down there in the description. Thank you for watching, and for watching right the way to the end. This has been a behemoth and has been part of my life for the best part of half a year now. So frankly, sitting here, I'm quite glad that we're at the end of this process. I hope that you've taken something away from this video, and if you did do so, please do share it with people who you think would also benefit from watching it. As I said, this change is only going to come from individuals affecting system level change, and that starts with people like you. So by making it to the end and even watching me say this, you're already doing great. The next step is to do something with this information and to help other people do the same thing. Please do the YouTube pleasantries, leave a comment down below with your thoughts, like the video, share it with people who you think would also benefit, and if you'd like to watch something else from me next, then here's 2 videos I prepared earlier. But that just leads me to say thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.